Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome back to another Friday Live here at Precision Golf. It's been a couple of weeks since I've been doing a Friday Live. I've been away doing a bit of playing myself, so that's been very enjoyable, getting out there and actually practicing what I preach. We're joined today by Nick Hastings. Nick is a sports psychologist, and we're looking to unearth a few secrets that will help you play a bit better golf. Welcome along, Nick.
Good morning.
So you will have seen over the last couple of weeks we've had some really good content come your way. We've had a workshop live. James was building a driver and some hybrids. Check that out if you haven't. Got Kate doing a little bit of an upper body workout and a bit of putter fitting as well. So go check all those videos out. You'll be able to find the links on our YouTube channel. So Nick, golf psychology or sports psychology? How long have you been practicing? First question, I suppose.
Gosh, so probably about 20 years now. I started off like with an academic focus on sports psychology at university, and then was lucky enough to work under Jos van Staphout for 5 years, which was, a really great chapter in the career, and obviously got to meet a lot of the tour guys and work with the elite level players. So yeah, it's been a joy, and a little bit less on the sports psych front now, but still like reasonably heavily involved. And I think like the field's developed so much in recent years. There's lots of new science coming on stream, so it's a great time, and particularly to be here in this facility, we now really have the opportunity to develop like a holistic approach to sports excellence. So it's very exciting.
It's certainly something that I want to talk about this morning, or this afternoon, should I say, about the evolution of it. I mean, anyone that's played the game professionally, and top amateurs, not so much the depths of amateur golf, but certainly many tour players have certainly gone down the route at some stage in their career with sports psychology. Yeah. And Josh, worked with Ernie Els for a long time, didn't he? He really brought it to the forefront of the game. I remember Ernie, that glove on, glove off, that trigger to get himself into the shot. That was, way back when. I mean, I was first introduced to it by Craig Defoy. I don't know if you're familiar with that name.
Okay.
He was a head pro at Coombe Hill Golf Club. And he actually brought out a book on sports psychology. Craig played in the Open. When I saw him a few times, it really started to open up my mind. I was only 17 or 18 at the time. What changes have you seen over the 20 years that you've been applying sports psychology?
So I think it's become so much more mainstream, right? I mean, like when I was first on tour, it was kind of seen as a bit of a white coat, fringe exercise. You're going to lay me on a couch, talk about your mother type thing. And, it was quite difficult to challenge that stereotype. I mean, Joss and I, the nicknames we used to have, from like the Poison Dwarf to the Sorcerer's Apprentice to like slightly more condescending names like, head fuck, things like that. Whereas I think now it's just sort of universally accepted as part of this holistic approach to kind of achieving excellence. And that makes it so much more accessible. Like we can go into much greater depth now than we would have done 15 years ago. I'll talk a little bit later on about sort of performance profiling, for example, where you really kind of get into an athlete's DNA and go through their life story from the very beginning, talking about formative influences right the way through their early life and career. That's never something we would have done in the 2000s. So.
And arguably something that the Main Street golfer goes, sports psychology. Don't want to start talking about my childhood. Don't want to start talking about backgrounds and influences and that kind of thing, which I think is the bit that people are so sensitive about. But then when you see guys on tour working with people like yourself, all of a sudden it opens up. Well, hang on a second. If Ernie's doing it, and he wants to win the Open Championships, maybe I can do it.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at some of Brené Brown's research, for example, on vulnerability, for men particularly, the main preoccupation is to demonstrate strength. So we're quite wary of ever like looking like we don't know what we're doing. We're wary of looking imperfect or frail or vulnerable in that way. And that can really kind of inhibit our ability to kind of reflect on what we're doing well and what we're doing less well. We sort of try and project this image that we're strong and that we can overcome all obstacles. So probably one of the first things I'd say this afternoon is like sports psych is often perceived as being about getting stronger, but arguably it's about getting better at being weaker. It's getting better at being imperfect. It's getting better at being frail. It's getting better at making mistakes. rather than like finding your A game every day. So that's also been quite a pretty big shift.
Yeah, and I think it'd be remiss of us to not open up with obviously something you're probably very proud of, working with Michael Campbell in 2005 when he won the US Open, overturning Tiger Woods. That, I think it was 17, that nice shot of him hitting a shot in there.
Yeah.
Really that moment that almost came to him saying, I've done this. Not quite yet, but
Yeah.
you're getting across the line.
Yeah.
There was a journey there, obviously, from Michael, who was always a really streaky player. I mean, real hot patches, cold patches
Yeah.
of his career.
Yeah.
That week he found something very special and magic. It's one thing doing it in a German Masters or a Scandinavian Masters, but doing it in the US Open and against Tiger in his pomp.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that experience for you as someone that, something that obviously probably sculpted your career moving forwards, perhaps?
Probably the most formative moment of my career. My mates still joke that I still dine out on it, even like 17 years
Why
later.
wouldn't you?
But yeah, I mean, it was such a privilege to work with him. I mean, we first met in China, actually, in a clubhouse locker room where like he was pretty despondent at the time. He'd had a pretty rough run of form. Was really struggling like with focus and form and consistency particularly. And to watch him kind of build his confidence over a period of 6 months was like an absolute joy. We mainly started working on like his pre-shot routines, his visualization work, and then got him a lot more aggressive and focused. And because, you know, to go out and do what he did, I think absolutely required him to make peace with worst case scenario. Like he could easily have lost that championship. He'd lost many championships beforehand, but in the 6 months that ran up to that, you started to see him gain kind of belief that he could reach that kind of level and that he could surmount the obstacles posed by so many other great players. So a lot of it was about this. There's a wonderful phrase by a Swedish psychologist called Willy Rilo, which is dare to lose to win. A lot of it was working on that, like, you know, saying like, if this doesn't happen, we have to be able to stare failure in the face. We have to be able to like make peace with that up front. And I think the liberating effect that had for him to then go and say, well, fuck it, let's see what we can do. Let's put our A game out there, and if it's good enough, it's good enough. If it's not, it's not. So I remember most his sort of bravery in that tournament, like and him and Sponge had such a kind of good dialogue going on about when to take on shots. He would say, you know, like a good shot at the US Open Pinehurst is 40 feet from the green, 40 feet from the flag a lot of the time. So he was playing, as Tiger often says, you know, aggressively to defensive targets and just trusting those routines that had become really consistent. So.
And how much influence did you feel you had that week over the golf coach? So I guess Mike Harwood was on the...
Jonathan Yarwood. Yeah.
Mike's the comedian. Maybe single. Anyway, so Jonathan, how much influence was Jonathan having that week compared to your influence? Because I always talk about at tournament, if you're working on technique that week, the ship sailed, the horse is bolted, the coach is really there just making sure that everything's on point, bit of backup, bit of confidence.
Yeah.
How much were you influencing Michael that week over Jonathan? This is not a bun fight, but
no, not
just
at all.
About how much were you involved with compared to the swing coaching element, I say?
So equally, I would say. Right. I mean, Jonathan was pivotal to Cambo's success. They're great mates to this day. You know, they had a really kind of tight alliance, and you know, JY would like work really hard with Michael to give him some like triggers for certain swing thoughts, which really kind of helped him thrive under pressure, and that helped me, to be honest, because you know, often what we're looking to do from a sports side point of view is distract the player away from negative thinking, for example. And like technical triggers, like very minor swing thoughts or like key swing thoughts, are a great way of doing that. So, you know, JY and I didn't always agree on stuff. I think he'd agree with that as well. Like we didn't always come at the world from the same place. But, you know, on the whole, the coaching side and the sports side was lucky enough to kind of marry effectively for Cambo, so he could utilise them both when it mattered. So
interesting. We always welcome questions along the way and keep us on our toes. So Ant Lockyer, thanks for joining us. Ant, on the subject of belief, what can someone do to form a belief of something that they haven't achieved before?
Wow.
I mean, if that's a deepie, because we're going to cover a lot, and I'm just conscious that these questions might fast track us to a place that we're going.
Yeah.
So we'll certainly earmark these questions, and I think that's probably one of those questions that will be almost in summary. This is what you might want to think about to get you into a place where you compete. Would I be right in saying
I think
that
that is fair. I think that's fair.
Daniel Benson, my golf, welcome along, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
My golf is a lot more stable when I have a quiet mind. However, when I get too many thoughts or it is too noisy, I struggle to switch off the noise. Any tips to regain a quiet mind on the course?
Yeah, 100%. So again, if you ask like great players to describe their best rounds, like almost always it's characterized by little or no thought. It's very rare you get like an elite player who says, I was thinking about 100 things, with the exception of possibly someone like Faldo, who like deliberately enjoyed that kind of focus, was very cerebral in that way. So there's lots of things Dan can do to like switch off the brain and distract. I mean, we'll talk a lot about pre-shot routines. Having a really consistent, reliable pre-shot routine that repeats is one way of doing it. On a shot-by-shot basis, and by the way, this is so common. Like, I mean, everyone, I think, struggles with this. Like, one technique we often use with amateurs, funnily enough, is like if they're over a key putt or a key shot, is to get them focused on a sound that's completely unrelated to what they're doing. Because a lot of the time, like for someone like yourself, you know, your swing is going to repeat naturally. Your body knows what it's doing. And even in the case of an amateur golfer, obviously there's improvements that can be made, but we want the brain to interfere not excessively with what the body is doing. So even a drill like thinking about birdsong or like the M25 in the background, anything which will occupy your mind's attention enough to just let your body swing the club can be very effective.
Yeah, it's certainly something that I've seen a lot over the years in pro-ams. You know, you often hear, and by the way, we're not going to forget that question because we're definitely going to come back to that, so stay tuned for that. Something that you see so often is, you know, stand on the sixth hole and the guy's already gone, oh man, I always make double down here, always hit it out of bounds, and all of a sudden they've revisited that journey, haven't they? And I think the thing that Dan was just referencing is when he's played badly and he's got a busy mind, it puts him on edge. And then all of a sudden, it's like I'm thinking about pink elephants. So pink elephants normally turn up, I'm thinking bad things. I've got a cluttered mind. I need to sort of break that chain. And it says that nice thought about, think about something third party, a noise, something that's distracting.
Yeah.
That's a really nice way of, and then when you get some confidence out of that, it's a nice way to tap into something that's going to help your performance.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the other one we used to do with Steve Webster a lot was focusing on his breathing. So if he was experiencing sort of interference, like I'm going to miss this part, or, you know, similar negative thinking, just to like, because the thing about breath is like you can really invest your effort and energy into it. And I don't want to sound like a kind of yogi here at all, because I'm not, but, and people can be skeptical about breath work, but actually focusing on breath is one of the best ways to distract the mind, because it's a bodily thing rather than a mental thing. And the more you're in your body, there's a great Buddhist phrase, which is, it's not the mind that doubts, the mind is doubt. So taking yourself out of, is why Rotella calls his book Putting Out of Your Mind. The more you're out of the brain and in the body, whether that be through breath or sound or touch, you might focus on, for example, the feeling of your jumper on your skin, or, you know, whatever you want. They're all great ways of taking yourself out of your.
Yeah, so let's touch on something that you've commented about so far. Is a pre-shot routine.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk me through what a pre-shot routine might look like. I know I have my pre-shot routine, and it's actually something that when I play, it's like, man, you just keep doing the same thing all the time, whether you've hit a good one or a bad one. And that's something that I don't even think about now. It's just what I do.
Yeah.
I think the bit that when I play, because I play so little tournament golf, well, there was a period where I was playing a tournament golf. I got out of that time before, that time where I've done a little bit of pre-shot routine and not encourage myself to just, hang on, just take a moment here. Let what's coming in at me come at me.
Yeah.
and start to not necessarily visualise, because I've never been one that's been able to feel like I can see a ball flight or try to mimic a ball flight. I've always been someone that felt like I just need to take care of what I do back here.
Yes.
With me.
Yes.
And that takes care of itself, because the more I've always felt like I get involved out there, the harder it's actually made me feel like I can create, because I get a little OCD that it needs to be perfect, and I even find that in my practice, everything starts to get more and more perfect, and then I get more and more tight, and it feels like I can't let it go. Whereas actually, if I just need to deal with back here, and it takes care of itself. So in your mind, what does a pre-shot routine look like for a good starting point for an amateur?
So it's an interesting one, and obviously it will vary very much for someone like you, who just is almost looking to like quieten down before a shot, versus someone who's like very visual and might want to like visualize how a shot looks. So let's try and take a couple of examples then. I think like the first thing we'd typically work on is like, if you just imagine you're like lining up a shot, Stu.
From behind or
from behind, from behind.
Yeah.
So like one of the first things we'll talk about, like it's called a pre-shot routine for a reason. A lot of people call it a pre-shot routine, but are actually thinking about what they're going to do during the shot, which might be a swing thought, or it might be like a particular position they want to get into. But before you even get to the ball, there's like, we almost talk about this imaginary line that you're not going to cross until you've got a really clear picture of what you're going to try and do. So the number of times you see players, particularly when they've just come off a bogey or a double bogey, rushing this phase of the routine, and they just cross that imaginary barrier immediately, and they're in the shot, and they've hit a shot in anger, and they're frustrated, and it's really difficult. So I would probably be working with your kind of preferences as you've just articulated them. I'd be thinking about like, what state do you want to be in before you even get close to that ball? So what would that typically be?
Well, yeah, and interesting. So I've done a bit of heart math.
So
I trained up as an instructor in that, and that's something that I still use today. So I actually try to create the emotion that I want to feel.
Yeah.
Before I step into
Perfect.
it. And so I actually like empathy. I want to feel empathy towards a shot, rather than being its harshest critic.
Yeah.
i.e., if it takes a bad bounce, that was unfortunate, unlucky. It's like, whereas I hear so often, and work with a few guys.
That's what you say to me, Stu, when we play together.
Exactly, James.
Just be kind, just be kind.
When I've hit a shot, if it hasn't gone, well, you tried your best, Stuart. Well, I caught that tree, it flicked up. Whatever it might be, having an empathy approach on something. So that would be, I'm more based on how I want to feel, rather than what I want the swing to look like, or what the picture is. Yeah. Because it feels like I'm requesting too much of myself.
Right.
In a situation that feels like the shot is taking too much of my attention.
Yeah.
And so I go more on how I want to feel emotionally, rather than, and try to hold that empathy over the ball after the shot. So that's.
So it's a perfect example of what we'd call a kind of state-based pre-shot routine. So people think all pre-shot routines are the same. Like you get a picture of the shot, you visualize the shot, you go and hit the shot. And that is one very effective form, which we'll talk about. But probably for you, for someone who's looking to achieve that kind of self-compassion, that sort of tolerance of whatever the shot is, that kind of state in that before you cross the line, making sure that state of mind is right, might be all the pre-shot routine you need. For the more visual player, we'd probably be talking about, before crossing that line, like Joss always used to talk about, like tiny targets. Right. So rather than what we see a lot of amateurs do when they're behind the ball, is they'll aim for the left side of the fairway, for example. And the brain doesn't process that very well, because how many options are there in the left side of the fairway for where the ball's going to end up, right?
James knows a lot about that, actually.
And not only is there the options in the left side of the fairway, there's options to the left of the fairway as well. So the misses for a massive target like that are likely to be much bigger. Yeah. Whereas what Joss would talk about is if you aim for like a blade of grass, and I'm sure you guys have heard this before, or a little tree top, or like the smallest target you can, as far as the brain's concerned, the margin of acceptable error is much, much lower. So probably the first thing to think about behind the ball is like, what's your tiny target? What's the smallest target you can find on the horizon? So I don't know, what would it be for
I'm going at the bottom left-hand corner of the spire in the far distance.
Perfect. Okay, so that's about as tiny as it gets. So if you miss that by even 20%, you're still pretty much middle of the fairway. If you miss the middle of the fairway by 20%, I mean, probably not on St Andrews 1st and 18th, but on a tight fairway, you know, you might be looking at missing it. And then we get into sort of some more stereotypical kind of visualization work. So if you were a visual player, we kind of know it's not necessarily your thing, what kind of shot would you want to be hitting here?
So if I would like to see some shape, because the OB up the right, I want to see some sort of shape right to left.
Okay.
So I'd want to see it probably starting right corner of the hotel, at the end of the white
with you.
fencing.
Yeah, with you.
So top right-hand corner of that, and I want to turn it back into the left corner.
Okay, so that second statement is much stronger from a sports site perspective than the first. So your first statement was, I want some form of right to left.
Okay.
Your body is not going to know how much right to left you want. So it'll take that instruction and make its best approximation and give you some form of draw, but could potentially give you a hook without further instruction. Whereas your second instruction from the right tip drawing back onto the spire, the bottom left corner of it, is so much more specific. So then almost the next, once you cross this line with that image, your next phase of your routine would then be to create a replica of that shot next to the ball.
And again, this is interesting, and this is really useful stuff. This is really engaging. I think a lot of people are really going to resonate with this. Practice swings back there, over here. I've always been the guy that's been back there. As much as I say that I'm not visual, there must be a reason, because as soon as I do practice swing here, it feels like I can't see it.
Right.
Yeah, I do it back here because I can see it, and then when I'm in here, it feels like, not that I'm trying to get it over with, but it's almost like that Davis Love element of look back, swing, hit. Yeah. I don't like the thought of being here for too long.
Fine.
Because it makes me feel like, so I would have done my practice swings back here, and I think, again, we probably say that people need to find their own place for that.
Of course. And like, you know, sports psych is not a one size fits all. Like you can go and read, I mean, Bob is absolutely brilliant, and his books there'll be something in there for every single player, almost regardless of your ability or your outlook. But like when we start, what Bob does and what I would do as well, once you start to get to know a player, is you start to understand the nuances of his or her preferences. So what you're articulating there is probably, that's your shot zone, right?
Yeah.
Once you're in there, it's like the shot. It's not the pre-shot, it's the shot. So we're probably saying your pre-shot is happening all behind this imaginary line, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So where would you want to be face on?
When I'm doing my practice swing.
Yeah.
Yeah, side on. So I'd always make my my practice swing here, and I've never changed. Like, I've been doing the same little reversal back here, like, for 15 years.
So what would it be like back there to create a shot replica of your little soft draw?
I wouldn't do anything different. It feels like I need to smell draw, not do anything to create draw.
Fine. What does smelling draw look like to you, or smell like to you? How do you do that?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
It's like I couldn't tell you. Well, I mean, I just feel like I work around the ball.
Okay, so it's a feeling.
Yeah, for a draw. But again, if it would be so subtle, it would be untraceable. If someone was trying to see whether I'm going to hit a fade or draw, you wouldn't see it back there.
Fine.
In terms of making a practice swing. So the practice swing is more about seeing how the ball's going to draw. I mean, I'm obviously doing something, but it feels just a bit more around it, whereas the fade might look a little bit more like that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't look any different, but to me, through the ball, it just feels like I'm doing something different down at the bottom.
So you've got a very subtle feeling in the body in the practice swing, and then, so let's just try this then. So keep that subtle feeling in the body for the draw, and then as it comes off the face, in your next one, as it comes off the face, just watch it. I know you said you're not particularly visual, but watch it take that shape you're looking for, that very specific shape. So what you're effectively doing there, which is where we'd probably start with most amateurs anyway before we got to know them in depth, is we're taking what we know about you, that you like that kind of kinesthetic feeling, less of a visual player, but we're sort of showing the visual element for those who are visual. And you're creating a replica of the shot. And the closer that replica is to the actual shot you're trying to hit, and that includes, so just try one more thing for me, Stu. Just count from the moment you think the ball leaves the club to the moment it lands. Just count that for me in seconds.
1, 2, 3, 4, down.
Okay, now let's hit the actual shot. See how close we get. I don't know if we can tell how long it is, can we? Until it lands.
1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, that wasn't bad for target, was it?
Pretty good for a first attempt, right? So what, we got about 2-second difference between the visualized time and the actual time?
Yep.
I mean, that's pretty bloody good.
Yep.
So with Michael, we'd worked with this, particularly on his putting, by basically getting him to, at his practice stroke, to like visualize the time it would take to leave the blade, tracking the ball round its curve to dropping in the hole. We'd time that, and then we'd time the actual putt from leaving the blade, going around the curve to dropping in the hole, and he got that down to 1/10 of a second.
Wow.
When we started, 2 or 3 seconds out. So the clarity of the instruction that you provide can be really like honed very effectively through this kind of visualization work.
Yeah. Impressive stuff. So Daniel Benson says, do you change your pre-shot routine when trying to implement a swing change, or keep it the same to stay in the right frame of mind?
That's a coaching question almost.
Well,
What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there should be like so little influence on the coaching element when we're in this phase. It's like, for me, my golf swing instructor is dead to me, you know, because I just don't think there is anything useful that comes out of it. It becomes clunky. There might be 10% that you might take away from but to override it with what we're talking about here, I just think there's just too much interference. I never was able to do it, and then when I've actually had people film me in tournament play, it didn't really look any different. So it only added to the load on me to perform. So for me, I'd steer as far away from swing technique in a pre-shot routine as possible, really, if you're doing some good practice. But if you've just had a lesson on the Thursday morning and you're playing in the afternoon, A, you've asked for trouble, but B, you'd be inhuman if you didn't actually try to drag some of that lesson into the first tee.
Yeah. I mean, when Podreg won at Carnoustie, the Open, a lot of people asked him like what he was thinking about over that last 2.5 foot putt. Like, was he thinking about something technical? Was he thinking about what would happen if he missed? And I think him and Bob Rotella had worked very, very closely on sort of pre-shot routines. And he just said, I was just thinking about the same process I went through on every single putt previously. So what we're looking for is kind of repetition, consistency, repeatability. So the more you interfere with that with novel stuff, it might have the benefit of distracting your mind potentially. So sometimes I think the addition of a swing thought can be really helpful to distract you from negative thinking. And it may be the swing thought that's helping you, or it may be the fact that the swing thought is stopping you from thinking the negative shit you were thinking before. We don't quite know which is which. It probably depends on the technique. But typically, the more repetitive and the more consistent, the more sameness you can have in any given routine, the more likely it is to be consistent for you.
And I think, from my experience, whenever I've tweaked with a pre-shot routine, or built in some form of different feel with a swing technique, it's made me feel vulnerable. It takes an awful long time before I can feel confident that change is going to start to deliver that kind of performance. Yeah. Because it's not how I've hung my hat. And I think when you look at in the old generation, I remember being at the BMW PGA Championship years ago. Carl Mason, people probably don't know that name, but it was when the Great Big Bertha came out, and they'd given him the new driver that week, and he said, I'll probably take about 6 or 8 weeks before I put that in the bag, because I need to get to know it. Well, now they can turn up on the range on Wednesday, have a new driver in the bag on Thursday. Webby is a disaster zone for that. new equipment, new clubs, you know, but a lot of the tour players are, you know, and I think you talk that through with pre-shot routine and changing stuff. For someone that's looking to perform, the solidarity that a good pre-shot routine gives them is fantastic. It's worth 2, 3, 4, 5 shots, minimum, isn't it? And you probably have experienced that as you've got better with Michael and that interaction with what he's doing and the clarity of the output got better, made him feel more confident in his own ability.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably say 60 to 75% of my sports side work is on pre-shot routines of some kind. And the main reason for that is that that's the thing that kind of has to stand up to the most intense scrutiny. Like if that breaks down under pressure, there is no victory, basically. Like if it's fragile or you know, if it's unstable under pressure, then it's not going to. But your point about Webb is a really interesting one. So this is where we start to get into like individual differences and where they're so important. So I think 20 years ago, there was probably like 5 or 6 stock techniques, like a pre-shot routine, like visualization, that were applied across pretty much any player you would deal with. Whereas now we have quite a lot of resource in terms of like psychometrics, for example, which allow us to profile individuals at a very granular level. So you might have someone like Webb who's like more of a tinkerer. And if he's a tinkerer, then we have to adapt solutions that suit his tinkering, because it's like Anders Hansen. Like Anders was quite a volatile character. A lot of people said to him, stop being angry. People say that to Tyrrell, like, stop being so angry. It's probably the worst thing you can say to an angry player. Like, they need that anger. That anger, if you watch Tyrrell play, the number of times it like channels him into like a really effective mode of performance is staggering. And yet so many people on the sidelines are saying, I just wish he was a bit less angry. So it doesn't always hinder a player to be a tinkerer or to be angry at times. It can actually like really help them if the sports psych working with those players harnesses that energy for good.
Yeah, and so when you've got a pre-shot routine for the long game, how does that look perhaps with putting? Because I think people are probably, I mean, I was going to say probably more volatile with a putter, but if you speak to people with a driver, they'd say, no way, I'm terrible with a driver. What might a pre-shot routine look from a good start point from a putting perspective?
So I think the core principles are very similar, with a couple of exceptions. So if you think about like a 4-inch, the hole is 4 inches in diameter. That, as far as putting is concerned, is a big target. So, you know, you could have like a 6-foot putt, and if you're aiming at the whole hole and you miss that hole by 10%, you've missed the putt, right? Whereas, again, what Joss would talk about a lot is having like a clock face for the hole. So you might want to hit, for example, a really firm straight putt that hits the back of the hole at 12 o'clock and drops in. You might want to hit a really soft straight putt that drops in at 6 o'clock, and then every curve in between. So like on like an Augusta-like break with like 14 on the stimp, you might even be dropping a putt in at like 10 o'clock. And that clock face analogy for me just, I think, really helps work with players to like get more specific on what they're trying to do. So it's not just like hole a 4-foot putt. It's got a particular pace to it. It's got a particular shape to it. It's got a particular curvature to it. And this is where like Seve and Ollie and those Spanish, you know, the imaginations of those players are so useful. You want to kind of harness your imaginative power in putting and make it fun. Like Bob always says, you know, putt to hole it, not to not miss. And we can talk a bit more about that. But so again, in your sort of pre-putt phase, we'd be asking you things like, you know, I mean, let's set up a, I don't know, like a 10-footer for you here, Stu.
10 feet, cheers.
You can have a shorter one if you want. And obviously we haven't got a hole here, we've only got a ball, but like, let's say, I mean, this is a pretty straight putt, so we can't simulate this exactly, but where would you on that clock face want to be dropping this in? Would you?
In terms of, so, because it's a straight putt, are you talking about the clock face of either front or back, or are you talking about around the outside?
So we're going to test you. So even though it's a straight putt,
yeah,
there's still probably 6 or 7 positions on that
Sure.
clock face you could drop it in.
Sure. I only see 12 o'clock.
Okay, so let's start with that.
Yeah.
So when you were either next, do you prefer putting? Do you prefer the same as your long game to sort of start behind the ball, or do you like being beside the ball?
With my putting, the closer I get, the less involved I want to be. So when I sort of get maybe 4 or 5 feet in,
Yeah.
I'll do away with practice strokes,
Okay.
because I don't like, because again, as I'm getting closer, it's making me feel like I need to be more precise.
Okay.
I want to feel like, in my character, I need to get less precise.
Okay.
So over a 10-footer, I would definitely have a practice stroke. I'd have a little look. Obviously, I'd have a look at the line, but we've assessed that this is dead straight. Once I've done that, I'm just in with 2 practice strokes and done.
Okay.
Yeah. With no visualization, nothing.
Okay. Can we imagine for a second you're a visual player?
Of course we can.
And just
listen, I'm open to change. You know what I
Okay,
mean? So,
perfect, perfect.
So, yeah, so
So let's test you. Rather than say like you're going to drop this in at 12 o'clock, let's challenge you to drop it in at 3 o'clock. And that, on this example, is to hit the right-hand edge of the ball.
okay,
Yeah?
okay,
If you were going to try and achieve that,
yeah.
how would you visualize the putt? Where would you visualize the putt? Would you do any visualization at all?
No, I don't think I would know how to make it visual enough, the differential between the middle of the ball and the right edge of the ball.
Okay.
Visually, I couldn't. I mean, obviously I can see the 2 different contact points, but I don't know what it would look like over that part of the green,
Okay.
and I don't know how I would change it back here other than smelling it at 3 o'clock.
Fine.
You
Fine.
see what I mean?
So so the smelling it at 3 o'clock would just be, again, would that just be a feeling? Or would that be a picture?
Yeah, it'd just be a picture of where I need to be striking at that point, which would adjust me back here. I'm not someone that likes lines on putts. I don't like anything linear. I just think that what I'm feeling through my grip, because I've done enough practice to know where that grip is in relation to my putter face, up there somewhere,
Okay.
is going to take care of that.
So show me in a kind of language that works for you, a replica, not the actual putt, but a replica putt of a putt that would hit the right edge of that ball at 3 o'clock.
There you go.
All right, let's see how we get on.
No pressure, Stu.
I mean, how good is that? That's like,
I tell you what, you're good, man.
that is impressive. That is impressive. That's a first, like to get that like, straight off the bat. This is just about like having, whether it's a feeling or a picture, whatever works for you. What you did there was essentially create some clarity for your body in terms of what you wanted it to do. The problem we have, like when we set up to most putts, is because we have so many different, we just use the hole as a target, and we don't think that, we think maybe it's right edge or like a couple of balls right. These are vague instructions. Whereas with Cambo, what we do a lot is like, he'd basically imagine he had lasers in his eyes, and I know this sounds a bit like grand, but he'd effectively like burn the line. So he'd simulate his practice putt, the putt would leave the blade, he'd burn the line, and Anthony Wall did this a lot as well, into the green, watch the burn would go over the curvature of the putt, drop in at the point on the clock face he had asked for, so in this case 3 o'clock, and he'd then literally try and create a replica in exactly the same time as the putt. So he'd go now, watch it, let it drop, go now, we'd time that, and then we'd time the actual putt with exactly the same curvature.
Well, I think all I've got to say on that, think how good they'd been if they'd done it my way. I'm just teasing.
That's fair point.
I'm just teasing. But again, I think it's the point you make, that the visualization and how people see it so differently. I mean, the thing that's jumping out at me with everything that we've talked about so far, anyone that you're working with is the flexibility to work within their parameters and how they see the game, for hook or by crook, whether it's swing, whether it's visualization, whether it's mechanics. it doesn't really matter. You've just got to be able to be supple enough within what you're trying to put across to the golfer to be able to mould it within their framework.
That's exactly right. So I mean, you will undoubtedly, and Stuart Robertson will obviously talk about like physical flexibility. Like we're talking about mental flexibility. You know, we're trying to like understand the DNA of the individual, and that's probably the most important first step, because as we said before, like a profile of a Tyrrell will be very different to say the profile of a Harrington. And unless you understand what those differences are, you'll be kind of pulling out an off-the-shelf solution which may or may not work for that player. So you're trying to, the sports psych has to be flexible in sort of understanding the needs of the individual, and then we're asking the player to have flexibility in the way they approach that visualization to kind of get consistency.
So I want to just pick up on what Ant spoke about earlier, the question that he asked, and he asked about trying to push your way through to achieving something that you've never achieved before. Many years ago, Scott Cranfield, remember Scott?
Yeah.
I was, again, every golfer player has tried to tap into this sports psych stuff at some point. I went to one of his seminars, and the one thing that I took away was it was talking about breaking through comfort zones, because that's really what we're talking about here. We're trying to achieve something beyond what you perceive to be is a great achievement. One of the things I had never done in a tournament at that time was really broken par convincingly. And when I mean convincingly, I mean 4, 5, 6, 7 under. And so one of the things that he left me with was, all I want you to do every single day is just think about shooting 6 under par. Just think about it. Don't do anything else. Just think about it. Every time you step on the first tee, shoot 6 under par. Well, bugger me, 3 weeks later, I shoot 6 under par. And it was, but there was work. It wasn't just I'll think about 6 under. It was real passion in thinking about 6 under. And then I went out to Australia and I shot 8 under the PGA Championships, Australian PGA Championship. And it was like this breakthrough moment where it's like, man, we've got some real power here within ourselves, outside of all of the technical and the physical stuff.
Yeah.
What tools could you give to the people watching that might give them an opportunity to stretch comfort zones and perform at a slightly higher level than they already are?
Yeah, it's a really big thing. Rotella talks a lot about golfing thermostats. So he'll sort of say, if you're a scratch golfer and you want to shoot 6 under par, like right +6 is your handicap and see what happens. And it changes your belief system. And I'd say this often to like a couple of my mates who are like 20 handicaps, like put 12 down on your card and see how it changes your attitude to the game. You know, suddenly stroke 18 is not like just make a bogey. It's like, well, we might make par here and I might even make birdie. So you've kind of got to force that thermostat a little bit up or down, because it has a way of kind of bringing you back to the level you set for yourself. So if you're happy with scratch, you probably stay scratch. Whereas if you agitate to get lower, you kind of set that bold target for yourself. Like we talk a lot about the differences between amateurs and pros. And I think what pros do particularly, elite pros do particularly successfully, is their mindset is one that moves towards success. So they can set a bold target like that and set their mind about achieving. This plays to Ant's point about belief. The biggest amateur mistake I would say I see is that rather than the mindset being moving towards success, it's moving away from failure. So I don't want to screw up. I don't want to double bogey the last. And that immediately kind of creates this kind of negative mindset that isn't, it's not even the negativity that matters, but it's not relevant to hitting good shots. So you kind of have to have the boldness to identify that kind of really tough, brave target. And as we talked about earlier, make peace with the fact you might not hit it. But it's a bit like a boxer. A boxer has to know before he goes into a bout that he's going to get punched and he might even get knocked out. But they're always going into that fight to win. So it's similar to that. You have to know that you can take being knocked out in order to then go for the targets you want to set for yourself.
Yeah, and I think this, again, we're welcoming any of your questions, and we'll get Lewis Sparrow in a moment. He's hovering around in the background, desperate to come in and show us naughty. Oh, you've got questions, have you?
Yeah, well, it's linking on to what you said as well.
Well, get that microphone on and come on in. So Ant Lonclear says, perfect, I look forward to winning tomorrow.
Go on, Ant.
And
Bring
I
it
think
home.
I think it was one of the things that you said earlier in the show. Welcome to Lewis. Thanks for joining us, Lewis.
Hello, that's right. Sorry, mate.
So one of the things that you said at the start of the show was about that, almost exposing your vulnerability, you know, and something that I've tried to do in my latter years, and it came about on one of a seminar that I went to for a week long. It was a Paul Check week-long seminar, and there was just a room full of S&C coaches, and it was my first time. And after the first 2 hours, I didn't get any of it because it was all anatomy based, but it was deep. And so at the end of the 2 hours, I said, John Boskill, do you know John Boskill?
Yeah.
You heard of John? So I put my hand up and said, John, sorry to say, didn't understand any of that for the last two hours. And I thought, do you know what? It was the most liberating moment of the whole week, because it was like I showed my absolute vulnerability to the room, and the whole room gathered around me and said, we'll sort you out. And I helped them with the golf swing element of that week. That's great. And I think that's what we're trying to get across to people, that vulnerability actually makes you so much stronger. The bit that I've always really battled with is the minute you make people know that you're vulnerable, it feels like now you're being viewed as someone that's weak, and that how we are viewed by those people because you've made yourself vulnerable. But in your mind, you've made yourself strong, but there's still a part of you that goes, oh no, now I've said that I'm vulnerable, and then when they see me at a bad shot, it's going to make it feel even weaker. And I think that's the bit that I've always kind of, that being judged. You've told me you're no good off the tee, or you've told me no good from 3 feet, and now all of a sudden you're standing up over a 3-footer and you're being judged in that situation. So the vulnerability, I love that. I love shouting it out there that, you know, I'm a coach because I failed as a player, but I think I've got a lot to add to our clients to make them better. Yeah. What would you say to try to appease that feeling of being judged as a player, as a coach? How would you perceive that?
Let them judge.
Yeah.
Let them judge. And look, vulnerability is not necessarily saying I'm bad at something. Vulnerability might be saying I don't know how this is going to go.
Yeah.
I'm going to enter this tournament, be brave enough to try and win it. But if it doesn't happen, I'm okay with that. That's vulnerability. Vulnerability is not necessarily I'm going to screw up every shot.
No, sure.
So, you know, there will always be, and there always has been, you know, so much judgment from the outside world. And again, if you, I would encourage you guys to like dig into Brené Brown. She's like an absolutely amazing author, and she talks a lot about how vulnerability actually requires bravery, and yet we still think of it as weak.
Yeah.
Which is like a paradox, really, sure. Because all vulnerable acts are courageous. You don't do anything vulnerable without risk, emotional uncertainty, emotional exposure or uncertainty. So this is a brave way of being. And she talks about it being like you enter into the arena. You enter into the arena of not knowing what will happen, determined to put your best foot forward, knowing that if it doesn't happen, you're okay with that.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for.
And that's great strength in my books. Yeah. That's great strength. You had a question for
that
Nick?
That was kind of my question, to be fair. So if you do, you know, things like
I've got telepathy as well.
Fine. Yeah, it was quite canny. So in terms of like being, I understand the whole vulnerable side of it and how it is difficult to become vulnerable.
Really difficult.
Because you do feel as if people are always thinking you should be doing things perfectly. But golf, I mean, every round you have, and even if you have a blinding round, you're going to hit a couple of bad shots. But how would you, and this is probably a very personal question for me, but like how would you, say for example, like when I do tournaments, I do get very nervous and I can feel it physiologically. And obviously people I've spoken to in the past were like, well, you're
man up.
Yeah, well, you're just kind of like, you're perceiving it as a negative, but also you would feel excitement in the same way. So you could look at it in terms of I'm excited to go and push myself or try and, you know, do something. But I always feel that it does hold me back, and it has a big effect on how I can play if I do feel like pressure or there's judgment or whatever. But I don't really know how you would like overcome it. Do you know what I mean?
So there's a couple of things there. I think the first thing is acceptance. Like, I always remember when Nick Doherty won the Dunhill, he was working with an amazing strength and conditioning guy called Rocket Ron. I don't know if you ever came across him. who's like an amazing
Ron
guy.
Cuthbert, yeah.
Ron Cuthbert, that's it. And Doe rang him up the day of the tournament and said, I don't know what to do, I'm feeling really, really nervous. And Ron said, good, like shows you care. And Nick just brought out his absolute like best day and said, fuck it, I'm going for this. And like obviously brought home the trophy. So part of it is just accepting and tolerating the fact that those nerves, that anxiety will almost certainly be there.
Yeah.
And
Because you can't get rid of it, right?
can't
It's
get
always
rid
going to
of
be there. Yeah.
So a lot of sports-like interventions focus on nerve or anxiety elimination.
Yeah.
The next layer focuses on anxiety reduction. We would work on anxiety tolerance. So you're not trying to eliminate it or even reduce it necessarily. You're trying to make peace with it as part of normal human behaviour.
Yeah.
So that when you encounter it in a kind of tournament setting, it's not going to freak you out.
It's just normal.
The other big thing, this is a very good segue into confidence. So the other great way of kind of dealing with this is recognizing the connection between confidence and memory. So if I was to ask you guys like what you were doing on the 2nd of May 2010, what would you say?
I would have been, no idea. Yeah.
Virtually no idea.
Yeah.
What were you doing on 9/11?
I was playing in a tournament at Wentworth.
Right.
School.
School.
Yeah.
So you know where you were, know what you were doing, know who you were with, and yet that was what, 20 years ago? And you can't tell me what you were doing on a random date 10 years ago. So why is your memory for 9/11 so much stronger than it is for a date 10 years more recently?
We had an emotional
Yeah, so
impact,
emotional,
right?
Right. Massive emotional significance. So what you see the kind of average club golfer do, they come off the 18th fairway, 18th green, they sit down in the clubhouse with a beer and they'll sit down and chat to their mates and say, you wouldn't believe how terribly I hit this shot on 16, like I shanked it 50 yards right, made triple, fucking hell, fuck the whole round up. And then they'll have 5 more examples of those.
Yeah.
So effectively what they're doing is like 9/11ing their bad shots. They're adding so much emotional significance to them that they're making them more memorable. And if you do that on a cumulative basis, your confidence will go down because all you're going to remember is what you did poorly. So what we did a lot with, for example, Webby on his putting, because he was struggling with putting when we first started working together, we started doing something called tagging, which Tiger does. So every time Tiger hits a really good shot, at the end of his backswing, he'll sort of twizzle the club, like really quite forcefully. And that's a way of like tagging his memory to remember that great shot he hit. With Webb, what we did every time he holed a good putt was we get him to like punch the air. And like the more significant the putt, the more kind of impact went into that punch. And over time, that tagging of his good shots with emotional significance started to like bias his memory and started to make him believe he was a good putter, then a great putter, then an elite level putter. So for the club golfer, the more you can come off the 18th green and talk about your best shots, and even like write about them, like journal about them, rather than telling all your mates about everything you did wrong.
And I think that the thing with that is of course people play their way into confidence, don't they? They get on a bit of a rich vein of form from a technical change invariably, then they get on a bit of a run, and it's almost like they've talked themselves into, but not mentally or done anything to change how their character is. They've just done it because the golf ball said you're playing well at the moment, and of course it's got no substance to it, really. They've not used that spell of 2 great rounds to bolster the confidence so that when it does drop off, they become the guy that goes, don't worry about that, I got this, for the next shot. And that's something that people, what goes into a tournament player's makeup is deeper than swinging it beautifully on the range. The amount of time they put in with all of this gesturing and changing how they want to perceive their golf and their lives is huge, isn't it? I mean, they don't just get out on the range, whack a few balls, go out and win $1 million. The time and effort that they're putting in is, well, it's their business. It's their job, isn't it?
I think that's such an insightful point. Like the number of players that let their confidence be dictated by what their golf ball does. Like the golf ball's been behaving, therefore I'm confident. Like if you wait for that, you could be waiting a very long time. You know, like we've got to create confidence more organically, and we can use what the golf ball's doing to help us with that by celebrating the good stuff more. But we also have to develop a kind of inner belief, but also kind of an inner calm that we're okay with whatever outcome.
I mean, we've got so much to talk about, and I'm conscious we've got 4 minutes left because we like to keep these to 1 hour. What I wanted to touch on just before we go, there's been this real big push for performance coach over sports psych, golf psych. How do you see that playing? I mean, this is very much more down the track man, practicing skills testing, practicing a shot. How do you see that fitting in with your world and the tools that you have at your disposal?
So absolutely fundamentally, I mean, there's a couple of things here. I think the really exciting thing, and like we're doing this now at PG, is that there's a holistic offering. So like even the amateur player can go see a coach, he can go and see a strength and conditioner, he can go to the gym, he can see a nutritionist, and he can see a psych. And the cumulative gain of all those marginal gains, as Dave Brailsford would say, creates significant improvements. The other thing, this is like Dave Allred's territory with Luke Donald and Molinari, simulating pressure in practice is like so important. Like the number of us that go and hit 107 irons on a range and then expect us to go and shoot a round of golf effectively. A round of golf doesn't have 107 irons. No. So what we'd always encourage people to do is play some holes on the driving range, like put some pressure on yourself so that you're replicating. It's all about replication. You're replicating the challenges you're going to face in tournament play as closely as possible in your practice, so that becomes quality, not just quantity.
Yeah, I really feel that there is a whole workshop evening sitting right here with the three of us, some balls, getting some guys and girls down and really showing people what they can achieve in a slightly more in-depth manner. I mean, we've covered quite a range of topics, haven't we? Which I'm sure guys and girls would love to get a little bit more down and dirty with. Any other points that give us a couple of top 3 tips that you feel that they could take into their next round of golf that might be able to improve them?
So move towards success, not away from failure.
Brilliant.
Pick tiny targets and visualize your shots to those, and bias your memory to remember your good stuff more than your bad stuff.
Fantastic. Well,
I'm going to go and write those down straight away.
Get Ricky write them down for me as well. We don't have to write them down because you just watch this back. Listen, we've reached the end. Daniel Benson, a great and insightful session, gents. Thank you very much. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you along. Thanks, and we are definitely
good to come in very briefly. Yeah.
Thank you for turning up. Yeah, sometime,
right.
anytime is fine.
Again.
So listen, if you really enjoyed this session today, pop in the comments below if you'd be interested in a live evening workshop, either attending or tuning into a live of an evening. Comment in the box below because we will set that up, because I think we're super keen on exploiting this area of the game. Nick is associated with us now and he's going to be doing some work. If you want to reach out to Nick and do some work with him, drop a comment in the box below or email us at Precision Golf and we will certainly put you in touch with him either here or at his clinic. We'll certainly be able to facilitate that for you. Listen, thanks so much for joining us again this week. It's been really, really enjoyable. I'm going to be back next week. We've got some super guests coming your way. If you've liked the video, hit the like button, share with your friends, and we'll see you all next week.
See you soon.
See you guys.